Most of us dream of writing a book. We think about it, and we'd like to do it. We don't know how to go about doing it, but there are those in our community who have struck out and been very successful in getting that job done. And today we're joined by one such person. Ms. Nancy Lyons joins us here. She's written a history book on St. Francis called St. Francis of Assisi Beginnings. First of all, Nancy, we want to thank you for coming and being with us here today. And I'd just simply like to start, the title of your book is involving beginnings. How did this all begin? How did it start?
Well, when they were starting the centennial proceedings, I was asked to work on the committee as the historian. And they knew that I liked history, so I was asked to gather some information and do that part. Well, I gathered 3 notebooks full of information, history, pictures, and then when I started to type it up, I asked the sister in charge, how many pages do you think I ought to type? Because I didn't have time at the time. I have 7 children, and they were coming in and out and different things, and I'm just busy. I do a lot of volunteer work and stuff, and I asked her how many pages should I write, because I didn't want to do the extra typing. And she said, oh, I just need a page.
And you're sitting there holding a book in your hand already.
3 books. And so I thought, God, and I said to her, how do you get 100 years on 1 page? So I typed up, and she wanted pictures also. I typed up the 100-year things, like who the priest was that started the church, and who the first people were that married, first people that baptized there, and that kind of thing, and got as much on that 1 page as I could, and I gave it to her. And then people found out that I had all this extra information, and they were all coming to my house constantly. One day I had 30 people at my house, off and on all day, and wanted to see some of the books that I had. And so they would ask me, would you make me a copy of this or that? And I thought, I just don't have time to do that. Plus, that was going to get expensive. And so I decided that I wanted some of that information kept too in better order. So I was thinking along the terms of like a little cookbook type, little 5x7 or 6x8 or whatever, and with a little binder on it. And so I started typing that up and keeping it to keep for myself. And I thought, well, if these people that want a copy, if they want a copy, then they can take my copy and just make their own book. And as I was typing, I would see things and I'd say, this ought to go, this ought to go. And before I knew it, I had more than 100 pages. And all of a sudden, I thought to myself, I'm writing a book. If I'm writing a book, I might as well sell this thing. And so I just kept on writing, because the deadline for the centennial was coming up. The deadline was June the 9th, and I started this thing in January. And I talked to my spiritual director about it, and so he was helping me to proofread anything about the religious side that I might have mistakes on or something, but he didn't find too many mistakes. I was surprised, but anyway, he was a big support on that end of it. And he told me that, he said, when I finished, he said, do you realize that you have done in 5 months what it takes most people to do 3 or 4 years to put a book together? But I just kept at it day and night, and I kept it all out on this one room. I kept it on a table, and I told the kids when they'd come, don't bother a thing. But it finally came to place, and I'd never done anything like it before, and I didn't really know what I was doing. I just kept on doing it, and I didn't know what I wanted, didn't know how I was going to do it, but it just kept kind of going together. And
lo and behold, you looked up one day and did you realize the day it was finished? Or is it finished?
When I got to the last page, and I'm gonna skip over to the last page right now because there's something I want to read. When I got to the last page, I had I ended it with the pastor that was there, which was Father Thomas Homrich. And I got all, see, I would write about each priest and put as much information as I could find on them. And his didn't come even a half a page. So then I wrote a little thing, why are Catholic priests called priests? And there was a little paragraph. Well, then I still had a little bit more that I needed to finish the page off. And so we just had some, well, that wasn't in this. I was thinking right here was where we had First Communion class, but I put them over on another page to fill it up of that year, 96. But so then I put 1896 to 1996, congratulations, and I was congratulating the parish on being united in their faith for 100 years. And I still needed a little bit more, and so I was praying. I said, dear Lord, please help me to finish this book. And I picked up a piece of paper or a book out of my library there, and a little piece of paper fell out of it, and I picked it up to put it back in, and all of a sudden I saw this scripture reading. It said 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 15. And I read it, and it said, stand firm and hold fast to the traditions that you were taught. And I thought, wow, that has to be the last words, because this book actually started talking about how the Catholic faith in our area got started. And so this was saying to stand true to your teachings, you know. And these Catholics from Maryland came here in you have that over there, 1792 or something.
I have so much here, I don't even know where to start.
I might be able to find it here. 1785, 25 Catholic families came here from Maryland, and they bought 300 acres in the Holy Cross area and started the Catholic faith there. And the first Catholic church in Kentucky is built at Holy Cross. And so I was thinking, you know, here all of this faith got started in that area, and the same priests that built the Holy Cross Church, you know, eventually they came over and was ministering, you know, to the people in the St. Francis and Loretta area. And they was going all over Kentucky, you know, and sometimes they would travel horseback 60 miles to go to a parish to help the people there. And anyway, I just thought that was just really something, that we started with our ancestors there, and so that's the way I ended it. The Lord gave me those words.
I was going to say there could not be, I don't think, a more appropriate ending to your first book. There may be others. We'll wait and see. But it all started with actually one page. It ends up being one book for you.
Right.
And you say you spent about 5 months, something like that, on it.
It took longer to print it than it did for me to write it, actually. It did.
I guess I remember my days of high school and some college. When we did papers, we had to do a lot of research. What about the research that went into this? It must have taken an enormous amount of time, and how did you go about researching?
Well, you know, like I said, I liked history myself, and I had saved a lot of stuff, and then I visit the sick and the elderly in the parish, and I was still doing that. All the time I was writing this book, I was still doing that. And that was the biggest help. That's where I got my information. Because I had asked Sister to put it in the bulletin if anybody had any information that I could use, that I would really like to have it. And there was only one person that came forward, and that person was actually from Holy Cross. It wasn't even in the parish, but she gets a bulletin, so she brought me some stuff. And she brought me the first, it was a relative of hers that was the first wedding that I had to go in the book. And I think they were Mattingly's. And but she was a Ballard from Holy Cross. And each time that I would go and visit these people, you know, I'd stay sometimes half an hour to an hour anyway, visiting them. And so you got to talk about something. So naturally my mind was on that book. And I would ask them, what do you remember about the church? You know, did you know anything about how it got built and these kind of things? And they would fill in a little bit of information, and I'd get my notes, note paper out and make notes constantly because, you know, they didn't think it was important, and I didn't know if I would use it or not, but I was putting down everything that they was going to tell me, because some of them would tell me little jokes, little funny things, and eventually I did work all those little things in. Every place I could, I worked in all those little things they said. And then I would ask them, can I see your picture albums? And so we'd get to look in, and they'd tell me about this one and this one. So, you know, doing a book on church, you can't do like history of the area. You have to do the religious side of it. So I was asking for like confirmation pictures, First Communion, baptisms, weddings, and that kind of thing. And so when I would see these, I'd say, do you mind if I use this picture in my book? And they'd say, oh, that old thing. but then after they saw it in there, you know, well, they were glad to have it and glad to give it to me. But that's how I got it. Only one person brought them, and the rest of them I had to go out and seek it.
Well, you know, and we tend to forget in our modern day life, we take books for granted. I think most of us do anyway. When the beginning of our country was, you know, most of the time you didn't have a lot of books. It was people relating down through the generations what had taken place prior to all of this. So in effect, you went back to that method of, I guess, storytelling or remembering in order to produce something now that we will have on our shelves if we'd like to, and be able to move forward and keep it as a part of our history.
Well, you know, when they asked me to do this it was a little booklet that Sister, a pamphlet more or less. So it was about 29 pages. I guess you wouldn't call it a pamphlet. It was a little booklet, and a pictorial book for the church. And when she asked me to do it, I thought she was going to make a bigger book, because some of the parishes had gotten a bigger book. New Hope, I'd seen theirs, and they had a good book. St. Anne's at Hardstown had a thicker book. And so I figured there was going to be a little bit more than that. And but then when she was saying she just needed a page, I kept thinking about all the years that had gone past, and nobody had kept anything. 25 years there wasn't anything, 50th year, the 75th year, and here it was the 100th year. And I thought, gosh, you know, I like history, and I thought it's a shame that that's all going to go down the drain. You know, nobody's going to record that. And there was a man, and I don't remember if I put this in my book, and I hope I did, but if I didn't, I'd like to thank him now, even though he's deceased, thank his family, because he had kept a little booklet, probably 10 or 15 pages of a little 5x7 thing that he had written one time just on his own, typed it up, and the family let me see that, and that's where I got a lot of the history on the priest, because the church didn't have it. The church one time, somebody that came in threw out all that stuff, and a lady that was a secretary there, she said she got it out of the trash can and she kept it, and this man asked to see it, and that's how it got kept. He composed, you know, from the writings and the notes on each one of these priests, he composed this little thing. But I didn't, when I went back and did this, I didn't copy anything of his word for word or anything, but his was a big help, you know, to get the dates and the times, you know, where they came from. Some of them came here from France. The first priest that came here for St. Francis to start our church, he actually came from France.
I tell you, history was, I guess, one of my favorites as I was growing up. But you mentioned something a moment ago about the church being built. And I noticed in some of the material that you're sharing with us today, there is the actual telling of how the church was constructed. And I'm going to, in case you need it, I'm going to hand it back to you, but just tell us how the church itself came to be there.
Well, Father Anthony McHenry in 1887 by the way, that was called Chicago. St. Francis was called Chicago at that time.
Huh.
And I'll tell you in a little bit later, we'll finish this question, but I'll tell you a little later how it got the name St. Francis then from Chicago. But Father Anthony, he started building the church that's the present church there now. I guess you want to talk about that one, even though that wasn't the first one. It was a little log cabin before that, but we'll talk about this one. But he started building it in the spring of 1896. And on July the 1st of 1896, Bishop George McCloskey blessed the cornerstone for that new church in Chicago, Kentucky. But before that church was completed, this priest died, and another priest had to finish building it. I guess it takes a long time to build a big church like that. And he died of pneumonia in October. He started it in early spring, and then in October of that same year he died. So, and he was the first priest to actually live in the priest house there too. But Father Hart then came there, and he completed and dedicated the ceremonies for the church in December of 1900. So it was a while before they actually got the church completed and the ceremonies and all. And they had a solemn high mass, and it was the high mass, by the way, was celebrated by Reverend Edwin Drury. He was a former pastor too there, and he was a former pastor at Loretta Mother House, and he was at Loretta Mother House when he came over there. And he is in my Livers history book on my side of the family. Okay. So he's the one that said the mass. But you know, you was talking about how I get history. I used to visit an old man in the nursing home. I used to visit him before he was put in the nursing home, Mr. Webb Ballard from St. Francis. And he died when he was 103. And I visited him a lot, and he had a good mind, and but he couldn't hear real good. And then they put him in the nursing home down there at the St. Francis Nursing Home in Loretta. And I would go probably at least once a month, sometimes more often than that, to visit him. And one day I decided that I was going to take my tape recorder and I was going to ask him some questions. This was before I ever knew that I was going to be writing a book or anything. But I asked him just what he remembered about things, you know, just talking to him about school. And he told me about one-room schoolhouses, and I think he said he was 27 when he was going to this one-room schoolhouse. And he just told me a lot of stuff. And then he told me about how the church was built. And all that was recorded on this little tape that of course he didn't know I was recording him. He didn't know and didn't care.
I was going to say probably didn't care, did he?
But his daughter was glad that I had done it because I gave her the tape. And then after I started writing the book, I asked her for it back so I could make me a copy so I could, you know, hear what he had said about building the church. But he was a big help to me when I was actually talking about how the church was constructed. And Mr. Noel Osborne, he too said that his father, William Lewis Osborne, helped to build the church. And they had got the clay off of a bank there in St. Francis where Rita and Tommy Medley now live. And the clay wasn't sticking together very good. And so they got the priest to come down and bless the clay. And after that, they didn't have any problems. It just all went together real good. But they set their kiln, I think it's called, set it up right there and fired their brick and went right on. Now that helped to build it. And I've got his, Edward, no, he wasn't a gardener. It's Elsie and Paul Gardner's, Elsie Gardner. I think Paul was a sheriff for a long time here in Marion County. Well, his wife's daddy helped to build that church, and his name was Edward Miles. They lived at St. Francis.
You know, there's so much to take pride in. And you've talked about speaking with elderly residents. There is a wealth of knowledge stored away in the minds of those.
Oh, I love talking with them.
I had a person I spoke with once, and their attitude was, you know, there's not much I can do now. I'm of an age that I can't get out and help work and do things like everybody else. And I mentioned to them at that time, where would we be at were it not for them, not just in giving us life, but in helping us to learn and remembering our history. We don't need to forget that.
Right.
And you mentioned the town changing its name. Again, I'm going to pass back to her. So interesting, and all this is in your book now. So if you're interested, folks, we'll get to that a little later. But tell us about that. And I've never known. I think it's page 69, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, that's good help.
She's got me.
The pages that he has there are extra pages that we didn't have enough of to go in a book, and so there's a few extra pages like that. And if anybody ever needs any of those extra pages, I have plenty, and you could probably get, there's about probably 8. Because it unfolds.
Oh yeah, we'll unfold it here for the cameraman to just show. You're talking about 4 on this side of the sheet,
and 4 on that side.
And then you've got 4 on that side of the sheet.
You might like, that's a map of the area. You might like somebody that has a relative on a page or something. You might like to have extra page, maybe just a frame. But I do have some of those extra pages if anybody needs them.
Well, I had never heard, though, if I've heard, I've forgotten, that it was known as Chicago.
Yeah.
I've learned something today. If you can learn something each day, I guess that's saying a lot. But tell us about that. How did it...
Well, Father Fitzgibbons was the pastor at Chicago, Kentucky then, of the St. Francis Church.
And his photograph appears on this page, as a matter of fact.
And also there was a distillery at St. Francis. And, you know, the distilleries needs, by train, they would have all these shipments coming in for their supplies and things. And their mail kept going to Chicago, Illinois. Everything they was getting was being shipped to Chicago, Illinois. And that would make all their delays in their distillery, you know, really, it was really hard on everybody. Nothing could be processed because they was waiting for this or that. And so finally the townspeople got together and with the priest and the, I guess the owner or operator of the distillery, and they came up with an idea to rename the church. Rename the town after the church. And so they named the town then on January the 1st, 1938, which was the year I was born. I can remember the year anyway. They named it St. Francis, Kentucky instead of Chicago. So, and then they made some kind of a rule, I think, that nobody ever was going to call another town Chicago. So Chicago, Illinois is the only Chicago, I think, in the United States now.
And that's about halfway down on that page 69, that when it was removed from the rosters, and the L&N Railroad Company removed from the rosters of the railroad and the post office department, says the Illinois metropolis will be the only city of that name in the United States. So,
that clipping came from somebody that I visited. So that's a clipping that was in the newspaper about that at that time.
Well, and you know, if for a lot of us, we hear of Lebanon, Pennsylvania, Lebanon, Kentucky, Lebanon, Tennessee.
Right.
You can imagine.
Everywhere.
Yeah, you can imagine the problem.
Right.
And as you say, oddly enough, due to making sure the product of whiskey was able to be produced and distributed, caused the name of the community to change.
Right.
How odd. St. Francis, tell us more about the community.
Well, at one time they said St. Francis was bigger than Loretta. I had a note there. You might have it underlined. Do you have it underlined?
Right okay. Here, again, page 69 at the top on the right.
In 1920 to 1928, he's got my highlighted.
I got the cheat sheet over here, folks.
At one time around 1920 to 28, St. Francis, which was then called Chicago, was bigger than Loretta. And in 1935, there was a clipping that said it also, St. Francis was once called Crossroads. And when I talked to a lot of people in the area, the older people, they did remember that. Some of them remembered that. And at the last minute, people was finding out I was doing this book, and I don't know which page this particular, yeah, here it is, next page, 70. They was finding out that I was doing it, and then people was trying to get pictures to me. Well, the printers didn't like that at all because I was adding pictures. But one picture in particular, I did ask them if they would print, and I was real glad they did, was a scene in Chicago when they had dirt roads before the roads were paved, and it leads, it's kind of like where the caution light is now, and it leads toward Raywick, and you can see some of the businesses down by the railroad track and all. And there was a doctor at St. Francis one time.
I was going to say that I would think your book would encourage those of us who live in Marion County to, you know, we talk about going and sightseeing and going to take trips to see the rest of the country. There's so much right here.
Yeah, come to St. Francis.
Well, and why not?
Right.
I mean,
it's history.
Every community has its own history, whether it's Gravel Switch, St. Francis, Bradfordsville, Holy Cross, wherever you want to go. There is a history in our county, and this is helping to preserve that for future generations. Now tell us, this is the thing that's always amazed me. Someone can sit down, maybe as you have done, I act like this is so easy for this lady to do, to write all the material, to research, to get it all put together, to gather the photographs and to talk to the people. Where do you find somebody to put all this together, to put it in the form of a book, to put it, who publishes it?
Well, I didn't know where to start, but I knew that New Hope did printing, but I thought they did just like more like pamphlets or newsletters and those things. But I found out that they did do books for Catholic organizations in other states. I found out when I went to talk with them, and they didn't do it for just an individual like me, for, you know, never had done it. Now they said because it was a religious book they would try it. So they did, and they tried to talk me into making it a small book, just a little book. But I knew I had pictures that it wouldn't do justice if I didn't have a larger book, and I wanted the pictures to show. So I went to New Hope. It's called New Hope Dominican Community, and yeah, they print quite a bit of books there. I realized after I got down there.
You have two versions of this book. When I say versions, they're the same book, but you got a soft cover and a hard cover on that. Tell us about the cost, and if, now I think you had talked to us before we actually began our taping here that you had several hundred produced, and you're down to very few now.
I had 1,000 books produced. Of course, you know, when they when you ask for 1,000, they don't always print 1,000. And I had told them I'd rather go over 1,000 if it took that to get my 1,000. And that it was a little bit under 1,000 that it ended up with. And they didn't have, this is the cover, soft cover, and they didn't have enough of these covers printed to print 40 books that I had. So I thought, well, I'd like to have, is this the one that's on?
No, this one over here will be you.
Okay. So I thought I would like to have a good hardback for my children. And I knew that was going to be more expensive, and I didn't think people would want to pay a whole lot for a book. So I thought, well, I'll get them a remainder, which was 40, done in hardback, and I'll just save them for my family. And but I do have about maybe 10 or 15 of these left. I'm not sure how many.
So they have gone.
And this one I only have probably 10 or 12 of the softback. And this, like he said, it's the same thing inside. It's just the cover, and this is, of course, sewn, and this one's glued. And this book, I I'm asking $50 for.
Uh-huh.
And the softback, the ones that registered before the book came out, before it was published, they got their book for $20. And then now it sells for $25.
It's a beautiful book. There's no question about it. Now, how do they go about? Do they just call you, or how do they contact you to get, if someone would be interested in purchasing?
Well,
and hurry, folks, because they are limited, as you just heard.
in every book I sell, I put a form here in case somebody knows somebody, because they've gone out all over the country. In fact, they are in other countries. They're all over the United States, but they are in other countries. There's about 3 that's in Bosnia, because when I started writing this book, I just knew all along that I wasn't really doing this book by myself. I knew I had help from another power. So I felt that Our Lady, the Blessed Mother, was asking me to give her the book. So I said, because I asked my husband how many should he think I should order. And at that time I only had about 300 orders. And he said, well, you can't get but 300 books because you just have 300 orders. But in my heart I kept feeling like there's going to be lots more books wanted, and I wouldn't have them if I didn't go on and order them. And I said, I think I need to order 1,000. He said, 1,000? Do you realize how expensive that is? And it is expensive to make up this many books. So I prayed and I asked the Blessed Mother, because I could feel that she wanted me to give her these books. And I said, okay, if you want this, you got to get it, you got to do it. And you got to help me to know for sure that it's okay that I order this many books. Mm-hmm. So I felt that she was saying, order 1,000, and the money is supposed to go for the orphans in Bosnia. So I said, okay, you get it done. So it just all kept falling together, you know. And so in every book I put an order sheet, and it says on there that the proceeds goes to Bosnia. Well, I've already taken that book amount, and the books that I'm selling now is just to help finish what I have in the books, helped me to get some of that back. Right. But in '97, after I'd already sold most of the books, you know, and given out all the ones that had taken orders and everything, well, there was a trip coming up with Father Dennis Cousins. I think some of you all may know him. He was here in Lebanon for a while. And so I got on that trip with them, and I got to, well, first I've been to Bosnia, been to Medjugorje 2 times before this. And so I really wasn't excited about going again because 2 of the times I went was through the war. But this time I knew that I had to be the one to deliver this money. And you can only take it in cash because, you know, that's the only, and I didn't trust anybody else to take it because I thought, you know, it might not get to where it's supposed to go. Right. And I didn't know who I was going to give it to, really, because I didn't know any orphans. I didn't know the priests there. And one day, my husband and I had gone to Owensboro. Our kids had given us tickets to a show down there, you know, at that hotel, wherever they have those shows in Owensboro. And while we were there, I met a lady that I had met in Medjugorje. And she lives here in the United States, but she's been living had been living in Bosnia for a long time because she knew she could speak their language, and she was actually helping the orphans and the refugees. And so I started telling her that no, she was getting ready to go back in October. That's when I was going. I knew already that I was going, but I didn't know where I was going to take it. And so she started telling about helping to build this orphanage. And I thought, I didn't say to her then, but I thought, okay, Lord, I know you're telling me that this is where you want the money to go. So I just listened, and I got her address and everything, and the priest's name that was that she was working with and all that. And I went back home, and I kept thinking about it and thinking about it. And finally one day I called her and I said, you know, I'm writing a book, and I know I'm supposed to be giving it to the orphans, and I didn't know how to get in touch with anybody with orphans, except Father Yozo I knew that had worked with orphans, and I'd been to his place the other time, and he had a big place with orphanage. And I had thought, well, that's probably who it was, you know. But after I knew that there's other places, because Bosnia was torn up all over, that there's more orphans than just those in that area, and everybody was helping them, that this is the ones I know that Mary wants me to help. So I told her, I said, I need to get this money there. Can you help me? And she said, yes. And so she called the priest herself, and she told him that there was a lady coming a certain day, and he has a gift for him. But she wasn't allowed to tell him, you know, what it was. He didn't know he was getting money. He didn't know what he was getting. And I was real reluctant about how am I going to do this, because, you know, I thought I might get mobbed at the airport or something. And so I took a book, and I had a big envelope in it. And at the airport, you know, I just got it out and said, you know, here's your gift. Of course, he couldn't understand, and he met me at the airport. And he had a interpreter that was there, and I just kept saying, this is your gift, you know, and just like that, because I couldn't say, you know, open it up. And so he was all excited, I could tell. I think he knew, you know, there was more than just a book. And but anyway, so then I go on to Medjugorje, and I had this kind of planned out a little bit with the lady from Owensboro before we went, that they were coming back at a different time. They were actually going the same time, but not with our group. And in fact, they came a week later than me. So when they got there, I didn't actually see them, and I'd never done this before, but when my people left, they went on somewhere else by bus to tour some other parts in Bosnia, and they left me in Medjugorje all alone.
Oh,
and so
you felt good, didn't you?
I had met a family the first time that I don't know how we're getting on this group, but I'll tell you anyway. I'd met a family the first time I went that I was sort of helping throughout the war, and so I was going to try to visit them, him and his family. It was a young boy, 23 years old, and I was going to try to visit them before I come on back to the United States. And so he met me at the bus station rather. I traveled 90 miles by bus by myself with nobody that spoke a bit of English, and I had 9 suitcases because all the people that was on the trip with us had given all their leftover things that they'd used all week and belongings and things, just sent the whole suitcases and all. And of course I brought suitcases too, because I brought Christmas gifts for the orphans. Somebody had donated, American Greetings had donated these little teddy bears with little Christmas sweaters on, and I had all these that I had to get on that bus, and so I ended up getting to come to Split, is where he lived, and that's where the orphanage was. And he took me to visit the priest where I gave the money to from the book. He took me there, and I got to meet the priest. I got to see the orphanage, and I got to see where my money was going then. And it was so cold. It was October when I went there, and they had no roof on it yet. They had no roof on it, and it was so cold in that building. And the priest told me that that's where my money was going, was to put the roof on and the insulation. So I was so happy that you know, they would have heat for that winter.
Nancy,
you know.
It strikes me as you're talking here. I can see someone down the road in years to come looking back at you and thinking, you went to others and they told you their story of St. Francis, how it all began, how the church was built, and now here you are telling a story that future generations hopefully will be able to appreciate, of the beginning of St. Francis of Assisi. and now where it's led back to Bosnia, and all of it connected together.
Well, see, actually, those people all helped. I mean, it wasn't just me. They all helped. If they hadn't have done that, those orphans wouldn't have got a roof over their head.
Absolutely.
Right.
And the faith has made it all possible, and
Right.
that's going on itself. Anything we haven't talked about here that you would like to go a little more in depth to? I mean, the book is what, about 200 or so pages long, almost 300.
Yeah, it's 220 or 225, something like that. About 225.
I'm just looking at a copy of the contents.
I learned too.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Tell us, just briefly highlight some of the things. I noticed you have the pastors and the priest and.
Well, like you asked me earlier how it got started and so forth. Well, I'd never done this, and I didn't know how to put it in categories or how to do it. And it just sort of fell into place like this, and I didn't ask for certain things, but then I would start seeing these things, and I think, well, I'm going to keep that. Maybe that might work out good. For instance, large families. Catholics have large families. Most of them do, especially that area did. And so people were showing me their family pictures, so I would say, can I use these? You know, can I borrow these? So I was having a lot of pictures of families, so I thought, well, you know, that'd be interesting then to write a little story. And I did try to write a little, even though there's a lot of pictures in my book, I tried to write a little bit of history about each content, each series of things that I wrote in here. And for instance, the weddings of the early church and so forth. I put that in sections all together, the early weddings, and then further over in the book, when it, like 50 years ago, I've got weddings that sort of pertain to that era, and then further back, there's still even more, and then there's biographies. Two friends of mine that I've traveled with, not just Bosnia, I've been all over the whole world now, and I have been since like '92. I've really gone to a lot of countries, and so I've met a lot of friends on my trips. And one young man in his late 30s has traveled in the group that I was in a lot. His name is Guy Murphy, and he loves St. Francis. And I was telling Alvin that I've been to Assisi, Italy, 4 times now, and I never dreamed that I'd be writing a book on St. Francis. But I knew a little bit about St. Francis of Assisi myself to write the biography on him. And I felt that since a book was on St. Francis of Assisi Church, we should write a little biography on St. Francis himself. And but my friend Guy Murphy loved St. Francis so much that I thought he could do a good story, and I was running short of time anyway for all this typing, so I asked him to do that. So he's got the story on St. Francis, and I had just gotten back from the Holy Land with a friend that loved St. Clara, and St. Clara was a Franciscan like St. Francis, and she started an order of nuns right beside St. Francis's monastery, or where he started his Franciscan order. And so she wrote the story. It was, well, I can't think of her name. But anyway, my friend wrote the story on St. Clara. And Janet Hilliard, she's from Louisville. And Guy Murphy is from Chicago.
Illinois.
Chicago, Illinois, right.
We don't want to forget that.
Right.
That, if nothing else, I've learned that today. That'll stick with me. But I mean, there is just so many. You've got families, babies, baptisms, first Holy Communions, as I mentioned, pastors and assistant priests, nuns. You've even broken it down in your book, events of each 10 years. Each decade, 50s, 60s, 70s. This had to be a tremendous effort on your part
Well,
to put all of this together. I mean, I'm sure you may enjoy it.
It's just a miracle. I mean, it just all happened. It was a miracle, I'd say. It just... The only thing that I didn't get in there that I really wanted to at the time, but I didn't have time, was I had a list of all the nuns or women that had joined the convent or, you know, studied in religious life from our parish. I had that list, and I was starting to get a list of the priests and the men that had studied to be priests, even though they didn't go on to be priests. But that never did get completed. Junie Mattingly was going to help me with that, and I don't know what happened, but we didn't get that done. And I didn't realize it until the book was already printed, that I never did get that in. But it was so much, and it was getting close to time for the centennial celebration itself that I just didn't get that done.
Time runs out on us. I know we asked you before we began our program here today, any thoughts of a follow-up book or edition, short though it may be? Maybe you could include something like that. Is there any thoughts of doing it?
People have asked me to do one on the town of Loretto, and there's just no way. It's just too much work. I'm getting too old for that now. Somebody younger will have to take over.
Well, maybe you can instruct someone that is interested how to go about doing it, and you know, share what you have learned. I mean, there probably were some disappointments as you set out to write this. There were probably some things you would have liked to have gotten that maybe you weren't able to obtain as far as information.
Yeah. Well, people tell me now that they know the book is completed. They'll say, "Oh, I didn't know that's what you wanted. I would like to have had this in it." So if somebody does want to write a book, there's lots and lots of pictures out there because people have told me there is. But one of the things that wasn't church that I thought ought to go in it, that I did put in it, was about our servicemen, the military. And because I thought, well, you know, they gave their life, some of them, for their country, and they went and fought. So, and we've never really had a list in our churches that I know of. I think St. Charles has a list in the back of their church of some of the people that have served in their country, but we haven't had it at St. Francis. But I did ask for it, and so I've got back as far as the Civil War, and I thought that was interesting. And in the Desert Storm, we had some local people from our parish, and I got them in. And some of my pages are colored. You might notice some of them are colored. Well, they just kind of did a random, you know, colored pages in them, which made it kind of nice.
Now, if someone, we mentioned you have a few copies left of your book. If someone said, well, I would like to get a chance to look at it and then decide whether I want to purchase one, which probably they will, but we'll plug that much of it in. Is there anywhere if they wanted to take a look at this and see how it looks and anything?
Well, my husband keeps one of each kind of my books at the store, our Lyons store in Loretta, and he's always there. So if anybody does want to see it, they can always do that. Or if they want to call me and stop by. I've sold all of them out of my house. Two book companies, two bookstores in Louisville actually asked me to put my book in their store. Tanini's let me set up in there. That's a religious bookstore in Louisville. Let me set up there for a book signing. And Bardstown Religious Bookstore, I did one there for a book signing when the books first came out. And is it Holly Cook? Holly Cook?
I'm not sure.
I think they're on Bardstown Road, and they asked, and it was another place out in suburban area, out in St. Matthews, Hurstbourne area. I can't think of that. It's a big book company that asked me, but I just thought I was doing better because people were going in there asking for them. So they contacted me then to see if I would bring some in.
So you have in effect been an ambassador for Marion County, St. Francis, to know that you've got that kind of contacts and people are interested because of the work you have done. I guess we owe you a debt of gratitude for this, because it's definitely a positive outlook on what our history has been, where we were, where we have come from, and where we've come to, I guess. So Lyons store would be the place to come, I guess. Might sit down and talk a little while, who knows?
Well, yeah, sit back and talk. That's a good place to come and talk.
Yeah.
There's a lot of old farmers hang around there and retired guys that sit around and talk about old times there. That's where you learn a lot of history.
Okay, well, the name of the book again is?
St. Francis of Assisi Beginnings.
Okay, and that takes us from 1896 to 1996. Nancy Lyon with us here today. Nancy, thank you for your time.
Well, thank you.
And thank you
for asking me.
You're more than welcome, and thank you for doing the work you've done. It's a fine, we've had a privilege of seeing your book here today, and you've done an outstanding job.
Well, thank you.
We do owe you thanks for that.